3 million pages of evidence, thousands of unsealed flight logs, millions of data points, names, themes, and timelines connected. You are listening to the Epstein Files, the world's first AI-native investigation into the case that traditional journalism simply could not handle.
Welcome back to the Epstein Files. Last time, we walked through Victim Testimonies Part 2 and tested what the records could actually prove without speculation. Today, we are examining the staff and mapping what the documents show about actors, timeline, decisions, and institutional response. As always, every document and source we reference is available at epsteinfiles.fm. So the first record is the 58-page household manual that former house manager Juan Alessi described in his sworn deposition, detailing the daily operations inside Epstein's properties.
This manual is, it's really the Rosetta Stone for the entire Epstein operation.
58 pages. That's not a simple to-do list.
Not at all. It's a codification. It's a rigid system designed for control. When we look at the depositions specifically from Juan Alessi, the house manager, we're not just seeing how a billionaire wanted his properties run. We're seeing the operational infrastructure that allowed a criminal enterprise to hide in plain sight.
Right, to function under the guise of just a normal, albeit very high-end household.
Precisely.
And Alessi is the key here. He's on the inside. His testimony's under oath. He paints this picture of an environment that was, well, obsessive.
Obsessive is the right word. He details in his deposition how this manual, this standard operating procedure, it applied everywhere. Palm Beach, New York, the ranch in New Mexico, Paris, the island.
All of them.
All of them had to be identical. Not similar. Identical.
What does that mean in practice?
It means the brand of toothpaste in the bathroom had to be the same and in the same spot.
Wow.
The water bottles had to be the same brand. The temperature, identical. The scent in the air, the linens on the bed, the way the towels were folded, it was all standardized.
That's a level of control that goes beyond simple preference. It sounds more operational.
It's entirely operational. First, it speaks to a psychological need for absolute control, but more practically, it meant staff could be moved between properties without any friction. Someone could fly from the Paris apartment to the New Mexico ranch and know exactly where everything was, exactly what the protocol was.
It creates a seamless bubble for Epstein, no matter where he is in the world.
A seamless, hermetically sealed bubble. But, just as important is how Alessi's deposition lays out the hierarchy. He draws a very clear line between house managers like himself and the assistants. And understanding that hierarchy is critical to understanding who did what.
Okay, let's break that down. The documents, especially the pinpoint database and testimony from the U.S. Virgin Islands, show a few names appearing over and over.
Yes. We have Juan Alessi, the house manager,
who we've mentioned. Then there's Leslie Groff.
Leslie Groff.
Right.
She's often described as his executive assistant or sometimes his right hand. Her role was central.
Central in what way? Was she managing the household?
No, her role appears to have been much more logistical, more corporate, if you will. The personnel files in the pinpoint database show her name on communications about scheduling, travel logistics, and even money movement. She was managing the calendar and the machine, not the house itself.
So she's a tier above someone like Alessi.
A different vertical entirely. Then you have Sarah Keller, listed as an assistant, a scheduler. Her name comes up frequently in victim depositions.
Very frequently. She's often cited as the person who coordinated their travel, their arrivals, the one who made the calls.
So she's the direct point of contact in many cases.
That's what the records suggest. And finally, in that inner circle, you have a name like Richard Kahn. He's referenced in various financial documents, but most significantly, his name is all over the Epstein will.
So we have a structure. You have the operational house staff, like Alessi, keeping the physical environment running.
Correct.
You have the schedulers, the recruiters, like Kellen.
The facilitators.
And then you have the logistical and financial managers, like Groff and Kahn, who are handling the business side of the operation.
A very clear, tiered system. And this is where we see the first major discrepancy in the records.
The discrepancy between what they were actually doing versus what they were telling the government they were doing.
Exactly. For that, we have to look at Epstein's sworn testimony before the Economic Development Commission in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The tax benefits.
Massive tax benefits. To qualify for this program, he had to prove he was a legitimate business creating high-value jobs for local residents in the USVI.
And high value means what exactly?
Well, not housekeepers and groundskeepers. It means data analysts, financial modelers, administrative support for a global financial consultancy. That was the claim. He swore under oath that he was employing a significant number of people in these kinds of roles.
But when you take that testimony and hold it up against the Maxwell indictment or Juan Alessi's deposition.
The two pictures do not match. They are fundamentally irreconcilable.
How so?
The people listed as, say, data analysts to the USVI government are, in some cases, the very same individuals described in depositions as managing the household.
Or scheduling the massage.
Or scheduling the massages. The term data analysis appears to have been a veneer, a fiction created for tax purposes. The Alessi deposition describes a staff that was entirely focused on two things: maintaining absolute privacy and facilitating the constant flow of young women to and from the properties.
So the real job description was service and silence.
Service and silence. The USVI testimony was an attempt to professionalize the operation on paper, to make it look like a legitimate financial firm. But the operational reality, as documented in sworn depositions, was something else entirely.
And Alessi's deposition just shreds that veneer. He's describing what sounds like almost a private hotel operation.
That's a very good way to put it. He talks about the specific, rigid protocols for the arrival of guests.
Which brings us to the next critical question, the one that hangs over all of this staff. What did they know? Or, perhaps more accurately, what did they claim not to know?
This is the knowledge gap, and it seems to have been managed through a very deliberate partitioning of information, compartmentalization.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, you can see it in Alessi's deposition. He's asked directly about what he saw. He admits to seeing young women, females, entering the property constantly. He details the protocol. The gates open, the car enters, the person is directed to a specific area of the house.
He admits he saw all of that.
He does. But he and others consistently claim they did not witness what happened behind the closed doors of the massage room or the bedroom. They claim they were firewalled from the actual event. They knew the procedure for arrival, but they maintain they did not know the purpose of the visit.
Plausible deniability. I just opened the door. I just answered the phone.
It's a classic defense. But the pinpoint database and the Maxwell indictment challenge that defense directly. They reference, for example, Employee 2 and Employee 3.
Anonymized staff members.
Right. And the roles described for them are not passive. The indictment alleges they were instrumental in both the recruitment and scheduling phases. These aren't people just opening a gate.
What kind of actions are we talking about?
Overt acts. The indictment details things like making the phone calls to arrange the meetings, providing transportation, and, crucially, distributing cash payments to victims after the encounters.
Distributing cash.
Yes. And if you are the person handing an envelope of cash to a teenage girl who has just spent an hour in a locked room with your boss, the claim of "I didn't know what was happening" becomes legally and logically very difficult to sustain.
That pierces the veil of, I was just the butler.
It does. It suggests a much more active, knowing role in the facilitation of the acts themselves.
And there's another document, a file from the Pinpoint database, that points to the staff's integration into the financial side of things.
Mm-hmm.
It has the file number ETATI 00015937.
Yes, the onboarding document. It's a reference to the Epstein relationship with a bank.
What does it say?
It describes meetings between bank personnel and Epstein's staff. It's about setting up accounts and procedures. This is significant because it shows the staff wasn't just isolated in the house, they were the interface between Epstein and major external institutions like banks.
So they were vouching for him, in a way.
They were legitimizing the operation. Think about it from the bank's perspective. You have a meeting not with Epstein himself, but with his professional-looking executive assistant or his uniformed house manager. They hand you the paperwork. It all seems bureaucratic, normal. The staff acted as a buffer that made the abnormal appear routine.
And the person managing that buffer, the person who stood between Epstein and almost everyone else, was Ghislaine Maxwell.
She was the chief operating officer of the entire enterprise.
How do the documents like the Ghislaine Maxwell detention memo or her indictment define her specific role in managing this staff?
The indictment places her firmly at the apex of the staff hierarchy. Operationally, she was the lady of the house.
What does that mean? She hired and fired people?
The documents, including snippets from the Pinpoint database, show she was responsible for hiring and firing household staff. She enforced the rules from that 58-page manual. She managed the schedules. Critically, she was the firewall.
The firewall.
Staff reported to her for most logistical matters, not directly to Epstein. This did two things. It insulated Epstein from the day-to-day operational noise. But it also meant she controlled the flow of information. If a staff member had a concern, a question, a complaint, it went through Maxwell. She filtered it.
So she managed the system of compartmentalization. She decided who knew what.
And she ensured adherence to the code of silence. She professionalized the complicity. She made sure the household machine ran with perfect efficiency so that the criminal enterprise could function without any logistical interruptions.
And we can see the physical evidence of that efficiency in the flight logs.
The Epstein flight manifests from 1995 to 2013.
These logs are a raw timeline of movement, aren't they?
They are. It's a massive data set. But when you audit them, you see the patterns. You see the frequency. Certain staff names appear hundreds of times flying with Epstein.
I'm talking about pilots, flight attendants.
Pilots, co-pilots, flight attendants, and personal assistants like Sarah Kellen. The sheer number of flights is one data point. It shows who is consistently in the inner circle.
But these weren't just flights with staff. The manifests also list other passengers.
Correct. And that's where the forensic analysis becomes so crucial. We see initials, we see first names, sometimes full names, of individuals who were later identified as victims, listed on the same flights as the staff.
And can we correlate those flights with specific allegations?
We can. The Maxwell indictment lists specific dates for alleged trafficking incidents. When you cross-reference those dates with the flight manifests, you can place specific staff members, pilots, attendants on the same aircraft at the same time as the alleged victims and the perpetrators.
Proving proximity.
It proves proximity in a confined space. A Gulfstream jet is not a 747. There is no real privacy. If a minor is being transported across state lines or internationally, the flight crew is there. They see who gets on and who gets off. The logs prove that the staff were the literal mechanism of transport. They were not just complicit, they were necessary for the operation to function on a global scale.
Let's go back to the ground for a moment, to the Palm Beach residence. Juan Alessi's deposition. He talked about more than just the household manual. He talked about the physical infrastructures.
Yes, the security.
The cameras, the gates, the monitoring.
This is a critical point. Alessi testifies that the Palm Beach property was heavily monitored, cameras everywhere. And his staff monitored these camera feeds from a security room.
Why? What was the stated purpose?
To ensure Epstein's privacy and security. They kept meticulous logs of who came and went. It was operated like a secure facility.
But this creates a paradox, doesn't it?
A profound one. If you are monitoring the cameras to protect him from the outside world, you are, by necessity, also watching who he brings into the house. You cannot monitor the front gate for security without seeing who is walking through it.
So the claim of not knowing becomes even harder to believe.
Correct. The act of providing security was also the act of observation. Alessi's description of his routine, day-checking the monitors, logging arrivals, buzzing people in, is also a perfect description of facilitating access for a predator.
And yet, in these depositions, he and others maintain this distinction, that it was just a job, a routine.
They do. They frame it as employment.
Which brings us to the motivation, the why. Why did they stay? Why the silence? And for that, we have to look at the money and the law, the economics of silence.
The economics are, on the surface, straightforward. They were very well paid. But the loyalty, especially of the inner circle, seems to go deeper. And for that, the Epstein will is incredibly revealing.
Who did he name as the executors?
Not family. He named Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn.
His lawyer and his accountant.
Longtime employees. Indyke was his lawyer for decades. Kahn was an accountant and employee. These are the two men he entrusted with his entire estate, valued at over $500 million.
And the will itself, it's structured in a specific way.
Yes, it's what's known as a pour-over will.
What does that mean in this context?
It means the will is a very simple public document. All it says is, essentially, I give all my assets to this trust. In this case, it was a trust called the 1953 Trust, which he had created just 2 days before his death.
So it moves everything out of the public domain.
Exactly. The will is public, but the trust document is private. By pouring the assets into the trust, which Indyke and Kahn controlled, the final destination of all that money, who gets it, how it's spent, is completely shielded from public view. It shows the absolute trust Epstein placed in these two employees to manage not just his money, but his secrets after his death. They hold the keys.
So that's the financial loyalty, rewarded with control of the estate. But there's a legal side to this loyalty that might be even more significant.
The Jeffrey Epstein Non-Prosecution Agreement, the NPA from 2008.
This document has been debated for years.
Hmm.
But looking at the specific text as it relates to the staff is, well, it's illuminating.
It's the legal linchpin of the entire cover-up. The NPA, which was signed by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Florida, did something highly unusual.
It didn't just give Epstein immunity.
No, it contained a specific clause that granted federal immunity to any potential co-conspirators.
Which is broad.
Incredibly broad, and it went further. It explicitly mentioned that this included named and unnamed employees.
Unnamed employees.
Okay.
So anyone who ever worked for him was potentially covered.
It's a blanket shield. Usually an NPA protects the main target to secure their cooperation. This agreement protected the entire organization. It effectively shut down any future federal investigation into the staff's role in the Florida-based crimes.
So from 2008, when that was signed, up until the new federal indictment in New York in 2019, the entire staff was operating with a federal immunity deal in their back pocket.
That's right. For over a decade, they had a legal document from the U.S. government saying they could not be prosecuted for their involvement.
What does that do, psychologically and legally?
It removes all incentive to cooperate. The main leverage prosecutors have is the threat of prosecution. You get lower-level people to flip on the boss by offering them a deal. But if they already have immunity, there's no reason to talk. In fact, there's every reason to stay silent, to keep your job, and to maintain the protection of that immunity. It bought their silence.
Legally and financially, they were locked in.
Locked in and shielded.
Okay. That explains the silence of the household staff. Now, I want to make a hard pivot. From a staff that was hyper-efficient and legally protected to a staff that was responsible for him in federal custody.
The Metropolitan Correctional Center, the MCC in New York, August 2019.
This is a completely different story. We're now looking at the indictment against Jeffrey Epstein jail guards.
Yes. This is where the narrative of meticulous control completely collapses into one of catastrophic negligence. The indictment charges 2 correctional officers, Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas.
Let's walk through the timeline from that indictment. It's the night of Epstein's death. What do the records actually prove happened on their shift?
The indictment is based largely on surveillance video evidence. And what it proves is that for an 8-hour period, no required checks were performed on Epstein.
8 hours.
8 hours, from about 10:30 p.m. until 6:30 a.m. when he was discovered. In a special housing unit, the SHU where he was held, checks are supposed to happen every 30 minutes.
And the guards' logs, what do they say?
The logs said the checks were done. That's the core of the criminal charge against them, falsification of records.
So they were filling out the paperwork.
They were filling out the paperwork. They signed the count slips. They certified in the official logs that they had performed checks at 12:00 a.m., 3:00, and 5:00 a.m. They wrote that they had personally observed the inmate.
And the video shows.
The video shows they never left their desk. They never walked down the tier. The logs were a complete fabrication, a lie. They filled out the paperwork for a job they never did.
So what were they doing for those 8 hours?
This is the part of the indictment that is so, well, mundane. It's banal. The prosecutors documented their internet browsing history from their government computers.
And they were searching for what?
Furniture sales, motorcycle sales. They were reading sports news. And for long stretches of the night, according to the indictment and the surveillance footage, they were asleep at their desk.
Asleep.
Asleep. It's critical to state what the indictment shows. They weren't coerced. They weren't letting a hit squad into the facility. They were bored. They were tired. And they were shopping online and sleeping. While the most high-profile federal inmate in the country was dying just yards away.
The juxtaposition is staggering. The obsessive control of the 58-page household manual on one side and guards sleeping and browsing for furniture on the other.
It's a total system failure.
But it wasn't just these 2 guards. Their failure happened within a larger institutional context. We have to look at the other documents, the bail memorandum and the transcripts regarding his cellmate.
Correct. This wasn't a failure in a vacuum. The bail memorandum filed by prosecutors shows that the government was acutely aware of who they had in custody. They argued vehemently that he was a flight risk and a danger to the community. The institution knew he was a high-risk, high-profile inmate.
And he had a prior incident in that jail just weeks before his death.
Yes, in July, which led to him being placed on suicide watch.
But he wasn't on suicide watch the night he died.
No, and that's a key institutional decision that the records document. Just days before his death, the psychological staff at the MCC made the determination to remove him from suicide watch and return him to the less monitored special housing unit. That wasn't a rogue decision by a guard, it was a bureaucratic one, signed off on by professionals.
And what about his cellmate? The transcript from his former cellmate, Nicholas Tartaglione, discusses the conditions.
Tartaglione was his cellmate during that July incident. But on the night of August 10th, Epstein was alone in his cell.
Why?
His new cellmate had been transferred out earlier that day. Again, this is a procedural decision. The protocol for an inmate with suicide risk often involves keeping them with a cellmate. The decision to remove the cellmate, combined with the decision to lift the suicide watch, created the physical opportunity for his death.
And then there's the staffing issue. The guard's indictment gives us some context on their working conditions.
It does. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it provides context for the negligence. The facility was chronically understaffed. This was a known problem. On that night, one of the guards, Thomas, was working a forced double shift. He had already worked 8 hours and was ordered to stay for another 8.
And the other guard?
Noel was working a voluntary overtime shift. So you have 2 guards responsible for an entire unit, one of whom is on his 16th consecutive hour of work. You have an environment of exhaustion and apathy, bred from systemic understaffing.
So if we base our conclusion only on the public indictment and the available DOJ files, the documented failure is entirely internal.
Based strictly on the available public record, yes. The documented failure is a cascade of negligence. Falsification of records by the guards, questionable psychological evaluations, administrative decisions to remove his cellmate, and a systemic failure of staffing. There is no document, no visitor log, no communication record, no video evidence in the public file that suggests an external intrusion. The story told by the documents is one of a bureaucracy that collapsed.
Let's synthesize this. We have 2 completely different worlds of staff, the household staff and the correctional staff.
The contrast is the entire story. On one hand, you have the household staff. Hyper-efficient, meticulous, governed by that 58-page manual. They were well paid, they were hierarchical, and critically, they were legally shielded by the NPA. They ran a flawless machine for decades that enabled Epstein's crimes.
A machine built on rules that were followed to the letter.
Precisely. And on the other hand, you have the jail staff, a system defined by a lack of resources and a lack of oversight. They were overworked, exhausted, and they falsified their logs. The rules were there on paper, but in reality, they were completely ignored.
The machine of the Epstein ecosystem worked perfectly to protect him.
And the machine of the justice system, which was supposed to hold him, broke down completely at every single level, from the psychological evaluators down to the guards sleeping at their desks.
So a network of paid employees facilitating the criminal operation.
And a failure of paid employees facilitating the justice system.
And what about the unknowns? What remains unproven in the current documents?
The big unknown for the household staff is the precise level of criminal intent for each individual. We have employment records, we have flight logs, we can prove proximity, we can prove they were paid. But for many of the lower-level staff, proving they knew the full extent of the criminal enterprise is difficult. The NPA from 2008 effectively stopped that investigation in its tracks for a decade. The trail went cold.
The wall of silence held.
It was bought with money and legally reinforced with immunity. We know who was on the payroll, we know who piloted the plane, we know who signed the false jail logs, but the full picture of who knew exactly what and when they knew it, that is still obscured.
So to summarize the record, the documents show a household staff that was compartmentalized, that was very well paid, and that was legally shielded. The jail logs show a staff that was overworked, negligent, and that falsified records. Somewhere between the two, the truth of the timeline was lost. Next time, international trafficking.
You have just heard an analysis of the official record. Every claim, name, and date mentioned in this episode is backed by primary source documents. You can view the original files for yourself at epsteinfiles.fm. If you value this data-first approach to journalism, please leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening right now. It helps keep this investigation visible. We'll see you in the next file.